Tim, recently retired from Chick-fil-A, came to spend time at a retreat with our ADDO team. Took time out of his schedule, invested and poured into our team. He did us a favor, and the next morning I got a text message from him that said, "Thanks for the opportunity to be with your team. Do you have any feedback for me? Because I always want to get better." And that is not performative. It is at the core of who he is. And so it's a great privilege for us to have him here. I know you guys are going to get a ton of wisdom. Would you guys welcome to the stage my friend, Tim Tassopoulos. Thank you. Okay, I'm sure I did not do your bio justice at all.
Being your friend's the key.
Okay, you started your restaurant journey, I think at 15 years old?
17.
17 years old. You ended your journey as president. Let's just zoom out for a second. If you take that career, how many years there?
46.
46 years.
This is when you say, you don't seem that old.
Yeah, you don't seem that old. What's the biggest lesson you learned from that?
Oh, my goodness. So the lessons from Chick-fil-A, I don't know that I can say this is the biggest, but I'll tell you the first. I started at 17 working for a gentleman named Gary Geddes. Chick-fil-A Restaurants are owned and operated by individual owner-operators. They're franchisees of Chick-fil-A. Gary Geddes, I was 17. He was only 21 years old. And he was a University of Georgia student. He had worked as a team member at the restaurant I was starting at. And Truett liked Gary so much, when that restaurant became available, he called Gary at Athens and said, "Do you want to come home and operate the restaurant you grew up working in?" He said, "Yes." And he said, "I'll come back to Georgia later." And I was the first team member that Gary hired. And what's interesting is on day one, when I finished my first shift, 17 years old, learning to clean tables, learning to wait on a guest. At the end of the shift, Gary said to me very deliberately, very intentionally, "Thank you for today." When you're a brand new team member, 17, and the owner says that, you're like, that's really cool. And then the second day, Gary said the same thing. And the third day and the fourth day. By like the fifth day, I'm like, I must be the best new team member ever. And then I realized actually Gary was doing the same thing with my friends Tom Balsamides and Greg Maples. He was incredibly intentional to every single day to communicate gratitude to every member of his team. And it was kind of the foundation for me and my experience at Chick-fil-A. And so over those 46 years, I tried to start with a grateful attitude and express that gratitude. And my friends from Chick-fil-A will, I think, affirm this. I tried to communicate a lot, like we should all be grateful for the incredible opportunity we have. I think it's important to remember, if you're going to steward anything, you have to start with gratitude, because you can't steward a gift that you're not grateful for. And so I think, again, whether that was the biggest lesson, I know that was the first lesson I learned at Chick-fil-A.
Okay, I'm going to go out of order already because I want to park there for just a second.
Okay, sure.
When you talk about that, you unpacked for me on a whiteboard a couple months ago something you call the stewardship cycle.
Sure.
About starting with gratitude. Can you just unpack that principle for us?
Yeah, so if somebody were to ask, like, hey, what's kind of your life philosophy? And it's faith-based for me, but I think life is stewardship. I think we're given opportunities, challenges, relationships, resources, gaps, and I think we're called to steward those. We don't own them, we steward those. Again, from my faith perspective, we do it for God's glory. But it starts with gratitude, this idea you've got to be grateful for the gift, whether it is the challenge or opportunity. But then what do you do with those gifts? You got to grow those gifts. That's the second key part of this. We're called to multiply gifts in our own lives and I think in the lives of others. And then when you grow that gift, then it leads to the third part of the cycle, which is you get to be generous with that gift. And so you start with gratitude, you grow that gift, and then you want to be generous with that gift. And then once you're generous, you realize, oh my goodness, that fuels that gratitude because I got the incredible blessing to be able to be grateful, to grow another gift, to be generous with it, and then be grateful and start the cycle over again. So
I've seen different portions of my own career where I've done that better or worse.
Yeah.
There's times where it's interesting as you watch somebody else get the promotion or somebody else get the deal, that you can tend to get from to this place where you feel that you're entitled to something. And so then when you're entitled, you're not grateful for something. And it feels like the negative cycle also works that way.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts on just how do you maintain that posture of gratitude consistently throughout a career?
So I think part of it is, what are the questions you ask yourself and the questions you ask others? I'm going to tell you a story about a dear friend at Chick-fil-A. We worked together for a long time. There was a situation where he thought he deserved to be promoted, and some other folks got promoted when he thought he would. So he wanted to meet with me, and we sat across from each other at Windy Hill Chick-fil-A, and he really just poured his heart out to me. I was grateful he was that vulnerable with me. And he was like, here's the question. He's like, why did I not get promoted? And my response to him was, I think that's the wrong question. I think the right question is, how can I contribute? How can I serve? Because when you actually ask that question first, the opportunity is going to follow. Now, it may not be in the right time that you think it should be. It may not be the amount you think it should be. But I think if we focus on contribution over achievement, over time, we're going to make more of a difference. And then I think the rewards are going to come. And so for me, it's that self-talk. What are the questions we ask ourselves so that we ask the healthiest question of others in terms of the role that we play?
That's awesome. That's so good. A lot of different great brands represented here, specifically restaurant brands. I want to call this out because when David was talking about the 80-20, that 20% looks different for different brands. So we've got Inspire brands here, Sonic, GoTo, McDonald's, Waffle House, Cercheros, Gusto, Savory Fund, Racetrack, which C-Store, but got a food service thing. Everybody may do it differently, but everybody is trying to deliver a consistently great guest experience. That's what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. I don't think anybody would argue that Chick-fil-A has delivered one of the most consistently great guest experiences over the years. Let's talk about the leadership that is required to do that at the scale at which you guys did it.
So,
are still doing it.
So, yeah, kudos to my dear friends at Chick-fil-A that are still raising the bar. So when I think about the connection between leadership and the guest experience, I think of it at sort of two levels. There's the 30,000-foot level, the most senior leadership level, and then there's the frontline level of leadership. Both matter to deliver great guest experiences and what goes into that. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples and then kind of tell you what the principle is. So first, talk about Truett Cathy and Dan Cathy. Truett was the founder of Chick-fil-A, opened the first restaurant in 1946, a diner that many of you know the story, the Dwarf Grill at that point in Hapeville, Georgia. 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, as David said earlier, closed on Sunday from the beginning. Truett, when he had that diner that he opened with his brother, rented a room in the house next door to the diner so he could actually be that close that if in the middle of the night he heard the gravel on the driveway move, he could jump out of bed to go help if it was busier than he thought it was going to be. I mean, that kind of personal commitment is really a starting point. So that commitment from Truett was like focused attention on the service to the guest. Yeah. Dan Cathy, and you think about Dan, it's like, okay, he's Truett's eldest son, and he inherited the leadership of Chick-fil-A, but he earned it. And I saw him earn it, especially when he showed that commitment requires vulnerability. So in the early 80s, Chick-fil-A was already the most prominent mall-oriented restaurant chain. We're in more malls than any other restaurant chain in the U.S. And we were growing like crazy. But Dan, who was responsible for operations, said, I want to get more customer feedback, so let's do a mystery shopper program. So we kicked it off, and I'll never forget this. We were at the big annual seminar that later we called Next, and Dan's standing up in front of all the operators, and he's like, here's the initial data of the mystery shops of your restaurant customers, all rolled up together. And you could tell he was getting emotional about it. He's like, 25% of our customers won't come back. Now, to think about your mystery shopper feedback saying that a quarter of your customers had such a bad experience, this is Chick-fil-A, that a quarter of your customers are going to say, we don't want to come back. And I'll never forget this. Dan is standing up there, and you're like, how is he going to like challenge the operators? But he didn't do that. He said, I've really prayed about this and thought about this, and I've realized that it's on me, because what's in the field is a reflection of my leadership, because he was responsible for operations at that point. So for me, at that 30,000 foot level, Truett and that commitment from the very beginning of his restaurant journey, and then Dan, that vulnerability to like, hey, I've got to raise the bar before I encourage and challenge anybody else to raise the bar, was, I think, a really indication of the kind of senior leadership commitment that's needed. Now, on the frontline leadership, I'm going to tell you two more examples of this. And they come from owner-operators. Because, again, Chick-fil-A is based on the premise that Truett had. He wanted ownership as close to the customer as possible. That is the key differentiator of the owner-operator model at Chick-fil-A, because they own their own business. So years ago, as Chick-fil-A was opening all those mall stores, we had a Chick-fil-A operator named Larry Meadows from Asheville, North Carolina, legendary Chick-fil-A operator. But year after year, Larry would leave his store in Asheville, and he'd go to 10, 15 other new Chick-fil-A restaurants to help them open their stores. No compensation, no financial incentive. And you're like, he's leaving his store. And when he would go, he wouldn't just be around drinking coffee. He would show up and he'd say, I got the kitchen. And he would teach these new Chick-fil-A team members what great food would look like and the recipes and operations of the kitchen. And when you ask Larry, why do you make all these trips? And this was before a lot of frequent flyer points. You're like, why do you make all these trips? And he said, having a better Chick-fil-A is better for my business. And so he saw, even as a frontline leader, saw the whole picture. And so to me, that was a vivid example. And then, sorry to keep going, but
this is great.
The other frontline experience was just 2 years ago, right before I retired. So there's an operator in Mesquite, Texas named Roger Clark. He's got 3 restaurants, which is highly unusual at Chick-fil-A. Most restaurants are single operator for a restaurant. They're the highest volume total restaurants that any operator has, and he's got the highest income. I was going to ask Roger a favor. He's a dear friend, and so I was going to call him, and I realized I was running errands on a Saturday morning. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot to call Roger yesterday and ask him, you know, what the heck, we're close. I'm going to call him on a Saturday. And I called him at about 10:45 his time on a Saturday morning in Texas. And I call him, and he picks up the phone. Hey, man, how are you? And he's like, I'm great. Now, this is the #1 operator in Chick-fil-A of volume and income. And it's 10:45, right after the transition from breakfast to lunch at Chick-fil-A. I'm like, how are you, man? He's like, man, hey, I'm at Mesquite today, one of his 3 restaurants. He's like, we just had the best transition from breakfast to lunch that, man, I remember in a long, long time. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. And it just hit me, because that frontline leadership is connected to senior leadership in this way. You want to be so effective as a senior leader, whether you're a CEO or an ops lead or whatever, you want to be so good at senior leadership and build the organization that you can choose to be part of that frontline experience, not that you have to because it's dependent on you, but you've created enough of an organization that you can choose to stay connected. And there was Roger, for me, the humility, the effort, the diligence to be the highest income operator in Chick-fil-A, and he's still in that restaurant on a Saturday morning, not because he was needed, but because he chose to be connected to the front line. So for me, it really starts at a senior level, frontline level with commitments like that.
You just mentioned 2 operators.
Yeah.
So let's double click on that for a second. I remember before your retirement, we're sitting at the Chick-fil-A Support Center. There was a CEO in town from a large technology company, and he was bemoaning his challenges to get these call center folks that were trying to field inquiries to be able to solve. He was going through his whole problem.
Yeah.
And you looked at him and you said, you need to identify the star of your system. Can you just unpack that principle and talk about how it looks different in different contexts?
So I'll give you 2 contrasts on this idea of star of your system. Okay, the premise is if you're, again, in an operation that creates a customer experience, you have to know who's the hub of that system that's going to ultimately serve the guest. And so I contrast Chick-fil-A and Starbucks that both rank year after year at the top end of customer experiences. Chick-fil-A's star of the system is the owner-operator. It is that premise that Truett had, get ownership close to the customer. And our selection is incredibly rigorous. We get about 125, I say we because 125,000 applicants a year, ultimately for about 100 to 150 selections a year. It's incredibly rigorous and difficult to be a Chick-fil-A operator. They own their own business, and those team members absolutely don't work for Chick-fil-A. Those team members work for the Roger Clarks and the Larry Meadows of the world. I worked for Gary Geddes. So that operator is the star of the system. We use the expression at Chick-fil-A that the customer is the most important person in the business, but the operator is the most important person in the business. Make sure I say that right. The customer is the most important person to the business, and the operator is the most important person in the business. That's the Chick-fil-A model. Starbucks is different. It's a corporate model. Their focus is on that barista. That makes total sense because that barista really is the key to those multiple choices that they put together to have all of those incredible drinks that they serve. And so at some point in your organization, you got to decide who's the star of the system. And you want to make sure you're rigorous in selection, you're overwhelmingly affirming those people, giving them the opportunity because they'll drive your system.
So good. That's great. Okay, this morning, Sean Ellis was talking about the way different leaders work, and he talked about that the results are really about the scoreboard, but like a good football coach, you need to focus on the process.
Totally.
I've heard you talk about, from a customer experience standpoint, that you don't think about it from an achievement perspective, but a contribution perspective. Can you unpack that?
Yeah. That goes back to the premise of we don't own the brand. We don't own the customer experience. We are stewards of our brand or our customer experience. And so when you have that stewardship mindset, it's important to take that to the next level, which is, okay, how do I steward this well? I steward it by focusing on contribution. What difference are we making in the lives of these customers? What difference are we making in the lives of these guests? And I know Sean's premise is like, how does it make you feel? Which is incredible. My friend and our friend at Chick-fil-A, Marcus Buckingham, talks about the two questions. Do you love being a guest at Chick-fil-A, and do you love working at Chick-fil-A? If that's true, that is a great barometer of the strength of both the brand and the experience. So when you focus on contribution, you're thinking about what difference it makes in the life of the guest versus the achievement can be, you are a transaction, which when you think of the person as a transaction, that's going to get in the way of building that relationship, in my view. So that's where I think that focus on making a difference. What do you, as my friend David Salyer says, what value are you adding versus value you're extracting?
Okay, well, let's talk about how this comes to life operationally, because if I'm sitting in here and I'm a marketer, I feel really good about today. Nick's talking about story, and David's giving me these exciting ideas and different countercultural approaches, and Shannon it was amazing. And there's probably some people here that are like, that all sounds great, but how do we put it into practice? In fact, some of the reasons people hire ADDO is they're saying there's a brand promise that we've made and it's inconsistent with our brand delivery. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about how you guys did that effectively to fulfill the brand promise through the operations? And even how do you get those two to work together?
Yeah. So that brand promise and how it gets delivered, it starts with a mindset, but it's leveraged through mechanisms. So what do I mean by that? So the right mindset is, how do you approach those experiences? At Chick-fil-A, one of the things that I talked a lot about, Truett talked about it, was the difference between success and excellence. So we often use those terms interchangeably, but they're really different from each other. Success is about what did we accomplish. Often it's how do we stack up to somebody else. It's a comparison kind of thing. Excellence is different. It's what are we doing with what we've been given? It's that pursuit. And we talked a lot at Chick-fil-A about be committed to excellence and don't get trapped about just chasing success. Again, success is comparative. Excellence is performance versus potential. So we talked about that so much because the mindset got into, okay, what's next? How can we get better? Whether it's through revolution or evolution, both matter, but you want to actually continue to pursue versus, okay, we've achieved it, we're doing great. So that mindset's the starting point. The second is mechanisms. Mechanisms really matter. And when I mean mechanisms, is asking the question, what are the things you put in your system that will actually lead to the outcomes you want? It's the process side of things. And so mechanisms are things like, I want to make the operation in the restaurant the simplest way to actually achieve that excellent outcome. I want to make it the simplest I possibly can to achieve that outcome versus I'm going to add complexity to try to get that other outcome. That's just typically not going to work. The other mechanism is how to use data because we all start looking at data about our customer experience. Again, David alluded to this earlier today, but when you get that data, don't start with the fix the worst. Start with learn from the best. Go to the right-hand side of the performance curve and actually look at those bright spots, learn from the best, and apply it to the whole and pull that normal distribution curve instead of trying to push it by focusing on what's wrong that we've got to fix. It doesn't mean you ignore what needs to be fixed, but you learn from the best of what are the best ways to fix that. So mechanisms related to how do we use data and where do we start from as an example.
I want to ask you about two different tensions. Let's just talk about, just a lot of these people are in bigger businesses. The ones I've interacted with, there's sometimes a tension between the operations department and the marketing department.
No.
So how did you, give us some brass tacks. How did you navigate? You were on the operations side.
Right.
You came up through that world. At the time, Steve Robinson was CMO.
Yeah.
Just talk about did y'all just get in a room and box it out? How does that?
I think even as, and Steve and David were together and built Chick-fil-A marketing and this unbelievable impact. But there was always this respect for each other. Things like Steve and I, as the lead, chief marketing officer, and I was leading operations, we would just do breakfast together. And we would just spend time together and we would argue at breakfast. And Steve was like, this marketing role needs to be required. And I'm like, Steve, we can't require that. It's a commitment-based system. And we would go back and he's like, but we need it. And I'm like, I agree, but we can't require it because that'll take the commitment. I mean, those kinds of choosing to have those leaders spend time together was really significant. Second is we actually tried to have marketing and operations learn from each other. And we got a bunch of people in the room who were in operations and moved to marketing, and in marketing and moved to operations. Both, first and second tier responsibility making those moves, and then the most senior people swapping roles. Why? It's really hard to appreciate the other person's point of view if you never experience it. And so that was a really big part of, I think, operations and marketing working together. The last thing I'll say, and we're so fortunate at Chick-fil-A to have this, at the end of the day, whatever role you played, I think we tried to keep in front of us at all times that the why is what matters most. And the why at Chick-fil-A is our corporate purpose that some of you may be familiar with, to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to us and have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. So it doesn't matter whether you're supply chain or finance or marketing or operations, a Chick-fil-A operator or a Chick-fil-A team member, even if you can't recite the purpose. I think it's in the ethos of Chick-fil-A that purpose is an others-oriented purpose. We're in it to glorify not us, but God, to steward not for ourselves, but for God and future generations. And positive influence is impacting others. So all of it is others, others, others. And that why, I think, is underneath all the marketing operations and everything else.
Okay, so that's that tension. Let's talk about the tension between the corporate office and the frontline group, just the operator field versus corporate tension. You have used this term for me multiple times about local ownership of a powerful brand.
Right.
Can you, and I hear you're saying we've got to have this North Star mission, but how do you keep some unity between those two groups?
Well, first of all, and I know Andy Stanley was alluded to earlier, one of the greatest insights Andy shares is, in many cases, don't think of an issue as a problem to be solved, but a tension to be managed. And I think what you're describing about corporate and the field is a tension to be managed, not a problem that will be solved. There should be tension in that. There has to be tension in that. The key is you're managing that for the benefit of the whole and for the individuals involved. All right, so local ownership of a powerful brand. Truett's insight, as I mentioned earlier, of ownership close to the customer, it creates so much more engagement. And whether it's an independent franchisee model or just local management that's close to the guest, that they can feel that relationship, that is a differentiator. But a powerful brand is like, okay, there's this unity that fuels the differentiation of the different owners and operators of those businesses. And that unity comes from, okay, what's the why behind this business and what's the brand promise that the business is making? And so at times you have to ask for consistency for that brand promise to be carried out. And everybody may or may not agree with that, but you may ask for that consistency. Then at the same time, when your natural tension on the corporate side is like, just require it, it's gonna be the same, that's it. It's like, whoa, time out. Let's manage this tension. Let's try to give as much choice as we possibly can for the field. And so there's no formula for that. It requires judgment. It also requires humility, because both the field and corporate have to be humble enough to say, it's not about me and I don't have all the answers. We're in this together.
That's good. Can I think about people in this room? You've got Chick-fil-A, Christian Brothers Racetrack, privately held, family-owned businesses. Then you've got people with private equity, ownership, investment. You've also just got publicly traded entities that are beholden to these quarterly earning statements. One of the things I've heard you share the most, and by the way, after this, I'm opening it up to this group for questions.
Sure.
When I have brought challenges to you through the years, one of the most common challenges you've given me is to extend the time horizon. Can you just unpack that principle for this group and maybe even talk about how it might apply in a context that's different than a family-owned business? Yeah.
So the idea of extending time horizon, when you're grappling with a difficult decision in business, but I think personally, I think financially, I think about fitness, all relationships. If you'll extend the time horizon, if you say, okay, I'm not just going to make this decision based on what I think the outcome is going to be tomorrow, but what will happen in 90 days, in a year, in 3 years, or 10 or 20 years from now. I think that's just as true for Chick-fil-A and Racetrack as it is for Coca-Cola. That even as a publicly traded company that's got all those quarterly expectations, really thinking about where do we want to be in 3 years and how will this decision actually make us healthier in 3 years or 30 years. And so I think as an individual decision making, especially when others are looking to us to make those decisions, sometimes you're going to have to say, okay, wait a minute, I'm not just going to react based on what feels right for the short term, what is best for the long term. And I think one of the things that helps you think that way is to remind yourself, I'm not the owner, I'm a steward.
Do you have any
even
examples?
when you're the owner.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about talking to Natalie at Racetrack. Like, she's the steward of her family's incredible business. And at some point, that baton's getting passed. And so it just changes your mindset in terms of the long-term view.
Just before we open it, can you think of any specific examples over your career at Chick-fil-A where you extended the time horizon and the business made a different decision than you would have otherwise made?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, and I don't know that it was the different decision, but I was just incredibly blessed and honored when the Cathy family and the board of directors asked me to be the president of Chick-fil-A. And the very first thing that I talked about with the board after I was asked to be in that role was actually to talk about my succession. Not knowing when it was going to be, But like I wanted to start thinking from that very beginning point about who do I pass the baton to. And I had no affirmation at that point that it was going to be Andrew Cathy. And of course, now he's not only exceeded me as president, but as CEO, succeeded me in that way. But for me, that extending the time horizon that it turned out to be 8 years later, that extended time horizon, I think was healthier for me because I was trying to not be wrapped up in that new responsibility, but also think about what really matters is how well that's going to happen at some point in the future.
That's awesome. I know Madeline's got the microphone. Let's turn it over. We got about 12 minutes or so for different questions. So on your mark, get set, go. Yep, Michael Patrick right here.
Chick-fil-A people ask. But since you're here, I'll ask my question. What do you think, what decision do you think made the most difference in our customer experience at Chick-fil-A from a differentiation standpoint?
So the original decision by Truett to create the owner-operator model. I don't think there's any question that Chick-fil-A, if you want to really say what's distinctive about Chick-fil-A, it's a great chicken sandwich, closed on Sunday, reflecting that private ownership and commitment to principle. But the operator model is profoundly significant. And it is because of that ownership. What's key, though, is those owner-operators, they have to feel that sense of stewardship for that business that's theirs and operate it in a way where they're saying, we're really going to try to pursue that commitment to excellence. One of my favorite phrases that a Chick-fil-A operator used years ago that Chick-fil-A Inc. ended up saying, hey, we'd love to borrow that phrase, was a very successful Chick-fil-A operator who said, I'm in business for myself, but not by myself. And I think that kind of premise is part of what sets us apart. I would say an accelerator of the Chick-fil-A business model that's been unbelievable is what we call second mile service, where we look at the guest experience and ask the question, how can we elevate that experience for the customer to feel like, okay, that came from a fast food experience with things like My Pleasure, things like fresh flowers on tables, and the commitment to have team members in drive-thrus, those kinds of commitments, it actually helps show the guest we care about you deeply because we think those things are going to add value to you, but they end up being a distinctive that separates Chick-fil-A in many cases.
It's awesome.
Thank you. So you talked about the brand promise and how you operationalize that. A lot of times you'll see that work get done and it's really exciting and then it fades.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how you've kept that top of mind at both the SSC and at the owner-operator associate field level?
So my experience on that is that so often you actually have to have new methods, but even also different language, sometimes to make fresh what's actually fundamental. And so, when I first started working at Chick-fil-A as a team member, we talked about good food and good service. And then there was the quality revolution. And then the quality revolution led to operational excellence. And it led to ideas about people aren't just customers, they're guests. And then they're not just guests, they're raving fans. You can draw a straight line back to Truett Cathy in his diner greeting his guests personally. But over time, you've got to have different methods like handheld technology, like team members in drive-thru, where there's this freshness. And even in communication, it's like we are going to stay relevant. And I think it reflects, again, another friend of Chick-fil-A is Jim Collins, Built to Last, Good to Great. I think maybe Jim's biggest contribution is the one principle in Built to Last, that great organizations do two things. It's not an or, but it's an and. They preserve the core and they stimulate progress. And so for me, that language and methodology is an affirmation of, okay, so what's core? Is that you are a guest at Chick-fil-A, you honor us when you eat with us. And then to stimulate progress, Truett didn't know about a Chick-fil-A app in 1946, but thankfully now that Chick-fil-A app is a difference maker that stimulates the progress of Chick-fil-A, but affirms that core that you're trying to preserve and protect.
Two-part question for you.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. First, did you ever consider multi-unit operators? I mean, I know you maxed at 3 there.
Right.
And then the second one is, if you have so much demand, what are your top 2 qualities that you're looking for in an operator?
Yeah, absolutely. Truett's original premise is so profound. I think there's a little bit of a sense of like, okay, to really change the fundamental identity of this would be pretty risky. But there was some consideration, and I'll get to that. Truett's original premise, I want the operator close to the customer, and in most franchisor relationships, it's the franchisee that provides the capital, and it's the franchisor that has the concept. Truett turned that around, and he said, I'm going to share the concept with you, but I'm also going to provide the capital to start the business. And so the original Chick-fil-A restaurant in Greenbrier Mall was built with Truett's money. But the operator was an independent operator that paid a little bit higher royalty than other franchise systems and split the profits 50-50, but they were in business, again, for themselves, but not by themselves. So to change that, you would really change the whole fundamental premise of this, which is multi-unit. You're going to probably be looking for a lot of capital. And again, that works differently than the system. What Truett's original philosophy was not only ownership close to the customer, but also as he would provide the capital and that person would provide the management, you would have access to a lot more candidates because fewer people have the capital required to open a new location. More people have the want to, and you just want to pick the right person, which gets to your second question. So there have been times we've said, okay, as we go international, are we going to actually do multi-unit franchising with capital, investing franchisees? Made the decision not to do that. And that's why the international expansion's been a little slower, but it's because we've said, okay, we've reviewed it and want to stay close to the original concept. Okay, second question. So for years, Chick-fil-A has talked about when you select somebody, and it's really true for an operator relationship, a staff member or team member, is we talk about 3 C's, the letter C, and it's character first, chemistry second, and competency or capability third, which is the reverse of most of selection processes. We start with, okay, this person have the capacity for this role. Character first, and when I say character, it's not just don't lie, cheat, or steal. It's like, does the person have the character to deal with reality? And in chemistry, like if you don't like serving people, it's probably not the right business, And so you want people that whether they're serving a guest or serving somebody who is, you want people that just love to serve. And so that chemistry part's key, and then the capabilities. And when you get to that capability, especially for an operator, it really is about an entrepreneurial spirit, that even though you're part of that big brand that is Chick-fil-A, that you still know I'm the owner of my own business, and I'm going to just love the accountability, the rewards of that, the challenges of that, and the impact I can have on my team members, my guests, and the community. So that's one of those key capabilities that makes the difference. I hope does that answer it specifically enough? Is that okay? All right.
Awesome. JP.
It sounds like some of the Chick-fil-A values are foundational and non-negotiable, like the not opening on Sunday.
Yeah.
As the brand has grown, have there been any other values or principles that you felt you've needed to enhance or adjust to help the company move forward and grow?
The decision for operators to have more than one store was a really big choice. And this gets back to preserve the core and stimulate progress. Truett, because of his original concept, he was like, no, it is one operator, one store. That's how this is going to be done best. And we had been in malls, and then we began to open some freestanding restaurants. They started to do really well. And we wanted to put freestanding restaurants near mall restaurants because that's where the traffic was. And Truett was just emphatic, like, well, they got to choose one. They can either stay in their mall store or they go to the freestanding store, but you can't have both. And we had so many discussions around that. And ultimately, this is just such a reflection, I think, of who Truett was. He said, this is not what I want to do. this is not what I probably would choose to do, but I'll let you guys make this decision. And the senior team at that time made that call to say, based on performance and proximity, there are a few operators that could have a second store, and now a few have a third store. It's still only about 15% of the entire operator community that's got multi-restaurant opportunities. But I think that reflected that, okay, what you thought was a core like value like closed on Sunday, it was different. It was just a step away from that, but it still protected the premise of the original concept. Okay, this is inside baseball though.
Hopefully not. Basically, in short, how do you think about creating a system that captures the why and the identity of the brand, even when the owner-operator or kind of a field leader is removed from the situation where someone's interacting with a guest?
Yeah, I think in that situation, are you thinking organizationally or for that individual? Like,
Honestly, either.
okay. Yeah, I think organizationally, I think it is incumbent on senior leadership to be crystal clear about the why, and that why we exist, what place do we have in the world, what contribution are we going to make, has to be repeated so frequently that people actually almost start, as soon as they hear it, they can repeat it back. I mean, it just has to have that much repetition. What does that do when you have that kind of frequency and clarity of communication? It actually raises the level of thinking, and it raises the level of commitment. It gets head and heart when that's the case. And so, and then you have to stay true to that's what we're in pursuit of. It can't be fake. It can't be, yeah, we're saying this, and it's like, man, it's all about the stock price. The only thing that matters is the stock price. The second thing I would say locally is there may be situations when frontline leadership, and it may be true for a team member or someone else, you may be more bought into that why than the person that you're working with. In that situation, then you've got to really focus on, okay, what can I control? And by focusing on the part that I can play to fulfill that, that's the best way I'm going to influence those around me, including the person I might be reporting to that doesn't seem to have that same why or long-term perspective. I think that's just a really key commitment for that person to make.
Okay, so I promised Aaron that we'd stay on the topic of guest experience today. I feel like we've done that pretty well, and not resisting the temptation to just go full leadership with you here. But I got a couple personal ones. Sorry, okay. Aaron, before we close. Just one of the things, Michael, anybody that's been around Chick-fil-A knows how respected you are for the way you've demonstrated servant leadership throughout the years. I'd love for you to just share any leadership principles. Let me give you one, and then you go tell the other. But one, tell us about library days.
Oh, yeah.
And library days, because this is a room of busy people who took a day away today. Library days when you became president.
So I'd had a practice of going to a public library for years. Dan had talked about library days, retreat days, and I've kind of grabbed that. And so for years, I had one library day a month where I literally would go to a public library. And why a public library is because you can't use your cell phone in there. And it was a day to reflect, to think, to plan ahead, to write like an important talk that I was going to give. And it also grounded me because I was always getting off track. But in those library days, it helped me remember what does on track look like. And then when I got asked to be the president, it was an incredible honor. I knew my responsibility was going to go up like this, and the pressure would go up like this. And so the first thing I did is I went to my assistant, Polly, and I said, I need a second library day every month. And the reason was, as our responsibility increases, the significance of our time goes up as well. So you've heard me say this a million times. Time is the leader's most important asset. And the reason is you can get more of every other asset. Brand recognition, relationships, funding, all of those you get more of. You can't get more time. And the more responsibility that it increases, every hour matters more. And so being more planful is actually, I think, more productive because just trying to be busier will not work.
It's good. It's good. Any other just closing leadership thoughts for people? Because I feel like I'm going to walk away. I've got pages of notes from today, but then I've got to go back and actually lead in my context, as do these people.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts
So
on
the
that?
two things coming out of a day like today, one is I hope today renews your commitment to be a student of leadership. That if we have, and we all do, leadership responsibility and opportunity, because leadership's a choice that we all make to intentionally influence others and to do it for good. But all of us, to get better as a leader, we have to be student of leadership. And being a student of leadership, to me, requires that you have the humility to acknowledge, I need to get better and I can get better. And then how do you commit to that? I think that's just key coming out of a day like today. And then the other thing that I would say is I would hope today you leave with more questions than answers, because questions are key to learning and growth. And I think questions back to the presenters, questions for others here, but even questions of ourselves. And to me, those are really two keys, because you've got to be humble enough and vulnerable to say, I want to grow and get better, and I got to be a student to do it, and I've got to ask questions, because you don't learn anything when you're talking. So I'm going to stop.
That's so good. Would you guys give Tim a round of applause? Thank you so much for
Thanks for
being
letting me
here.
do this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Man, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you.